everyone? That sexy nerd is back again. And as I told you, I'm also doing Lord of the Rings, or Rings of Power. And I'm doing these back to back because nerddom never sleeps. Anyway, so this is for the Rings of Power teaser that we saw. Again, as I said in the previous video, I'm kind of surprised they waited for this, but that they didn't wait for the actual trailer for this, but better late than never, I guess. Hopefully if they show a lot more in the teaser, in the actual main trailer, then hopefully things will be a lot more clear and they'll be able to give a better video. Who knows? But yeah, I've been watching the news on this show, and I've been watching things, and I think I'm starting to get. I'm not entirely on the hater side, but I'm really starting to see the problems of this show. It doesn't look like it's actually showing because us Lord of the Rings fans, we want an adaptation of the actual source material. And again, it's not about the race of people. You could really just explain that away with other stuff. I know a lot of Tolkien fans will come at me and say, hey, there were no black people, there were no colored people in Middle-earth. And or that elves were not colored or whatever. Or no, that there were no colored people, colored elves or something like that. There's a lot of stuff. And I'm like, remember, they only said they were fair. They never said that they were specifically white, but you could explain that away. But yeah, it is a little weird. But at the same time, it's a different time period. We got to include everybody. It works. But anyway, this is really something I am looking forward to. I despite all the negative publicity the show has been getting because of them not sticking to the source material, because that's what we want. That's what us Lord of the Rings fans want. We want something that explains the source material perfectly. And unless they do things from the first stage and the Silmarillion and everything, and they do it right, I don't know. Maybe it won't turn out so good. But at the same time, I have faith. I have faith that they'll pull off a decent product. Maybe they won't entirely stick to the source material, but The Hobbit didn't either, and it's a pretty good trilogy. They just compressed everything into a movie. The only thing that they didn't do right was Azog's backstory. I thought it was way better in the books. But let's not get into that right now. Let's just get on with the trailer. And remember, please like and subscribe if you want to see more sexy and nerdy content. And let's do this thing, guys.
Breakdown of the trailer for The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power series dropping on Prime Video on September 2nd. Now, normally we focus on Marvel and Star Wars here on this channel, but back when I started, we were mostly a Game of Thrones channel. And don't worry, we have not forgotten about House of the Dragon. We're going to get on that soon. Yeah, honestly, don't know how we're going to cover all this shit in a month, but we'll find a way. And for those of you who don't know what this series is, I'm going to break down this trailer to explain how it really connects to Tolkien's novels and what you remember from Peter Jackson's films, and how this show will hopefully be more than some Hobbit predecessors with itchy hats. Let's get started.
There was a time
even he's like
when the world was so young.
Doubtful. Galadriel.
There had not yet been a sunrise. But even then, there was light.
The trailer opens with the line, "There was a time when the world was so young there had not been a sunrise, but even then there was light." Now, The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit were set during the Third Age of Middle-earth. This series is set during the Second Age. The events leading up to that prologue that we saw in the Fellowship of the Ring, the forging of the Rings of Power, the rise and the defeat of Sauron, and the failure of men when Isildur told Elrond to f*** off. Now, Tolkien's Silmarillion recounts the events of the First Age when the evil Morgoth was driven from Middle-earth into the Void, and Sauron went into hiding. This series will explore Sauron's return in the Second Age and his rise to power in his secret creation of the One Ring to rule the other 19 that were divided amongst the elves, the dwarves, and men. So Amazon secured the rights from the Tolkien estate for specific parts of this history, from Tolkien's appendices to the Lord of the Rings books, as well as other supporting works, and case-by-case parts of the Silmarillion Silmarillion history, all this First Age era, which this show will flash back to. Now, J.R.R. Tolkien fought in the First World War, and his son Christopher fought in the Second World War, and that's when J.R.R. wrote much of the Lord of the Rings text. Christopher later on edited much of his father's posthumous work, and even drew the original maps for the books. So Lord of the Rings has really always been a story of an older generation passing down knowledge to a younger generation, and each contributing chapters to that overall narrative. We saw this with Bilbo and Frodo in Lord of the Rings, Frodo completing There and Back Again, A Hobbit's Tale, and Return of the King, and now elder figures like Elrond sharing the narrative with Galadriel. And in a way, these 3 ages of Middle-earth parallel Tolkien's own era, a past era that was stricken with war, the return of the threat in an even more brutal form in the Third Age, but now this period in between when everyone missed the warning signs. This opening shot shows the Númenórean vessel sailing through a canyon with faces carved into the cliff walls. Now, Númenor was an island kingdom that once existed, but sank into the sea in the conflicts and geographic destruction that end the Second Age. Númenóreans were an important part of that force that brought down Sauron, but much of their history and culture remains lesser known, so the show has a bit more creative freedom to explore it. This particular location might be the Vinja Lond, later Lond Daer, the Great Haven, which plays a major role as the Númenóreans help the elves in Eriador fight Sauron's forces during that Second Age. The closest statue to the city gate that we see might be Vala Umo, Lord of the Waters. And now we see the great elven city of Tirion, beside the 2 trees of Valinor, one gold, Laurelin, and one silver, Telperion. These were literally the source of the light in the land of Valar, and seeing them here means that we are flashing back to the First Age because they got destroyed at the end of the First Age by Melkor and the primal spider Ungoliant, and their last flower and fruit were transformed by the Valar into the sun and the moon. Galadriel was the elf played by Cate Blanchett in the Peter Jackson films. Here, a younger version of herself, played by Morfydd Clark, when Galadriel was more of a warrior. Elrond, of course, is a half-elf Lord of Rivendell, played by Hugo Weaving in the Jackson films, here played by Robert Aramayo. I love this detail. The music in the opening seconds samples Howard Shore's Rivendell theme from the Peter Jackson films. Let's move on.
Call to me, lands far away.
Elves have forests to protect. Dwarfs their mines. Men their fields of grain.
Here we see more of the beautiful landscape photography of New Zealand, aka Middle Earth, including an expedition of elves across a snowy mountain range. Now on the map, there is a northern waste north of the Fjord Wave that little is known about. Galadriel could be leading a group in search of Sauron. Then we visit the dwarf city of Khazad-dûm in Moria. This is the location where the Fellowship later makes camp when it is in ruins, but here it is thriving. Leafy vegetation growing from the ceiling, some sightings of agriculture in the lower right corner, bridges far more intact than the one Gandalf will later fight the Balrog on. And in the upper left, you can see 2 dwarves operating some machinery to redirect this beam of light across the cavern, presumably to help these plants grow and make this cave beneath the Misty Mountains so habitable. These beams were actually referenced in Tolkien's book. Frodo wakes up to see a beam of light entering that 21st hall where they were camping from windows on the east side of the mountain. It's just another example of how light in this world is a precious resource, carefully harnessed by beings like the elves and the dwarves to maximize their effect and their use, not taken for granted.
See, this is what I'm saying. This is what Lord of the Rings is good at, being hopeful and everything. That's why I have a little bit of faith and I try to ignore the haters and everything. Yes, there are mistakes looking like there'll be some mistakes, but they could still look good and it might win us over. Who knows, guys? Who knows?
Since these races are old enough to remember the 2 trees being destroyed.
We're safe.
So here we meet the Harfoots, which are the genealogical predecessors to the Hobbit race, alongside the Stors and the Falahides. All 3 groups mentioned by Tolkien in his Concerning Hobbits Fellowship prologue. This Harfoot uses a whistle to signal to the others about the approaching Antler men, and despite their beliefs in being safe, one Harfoot, Nori, sees a meteor crash land nearby. We're going to talk a lot about that later, but let's move on.
You have fought long enough, Galadriel. Put up your sword.
The enemy is still out there. The question.
See, that's another problem I have as well. You know, I understand the need to make women more tough and more interesting or whatever, but Galadriel was never a warrior. She was never a warrior in the source material. Elrond was the warrior, and from what I've heard, he's a politician now. And I'm like, okay, then how is he going to fight Sauron in the end? Is he going to be just going through an 80s montage and then he'll be strong enough to fight Sauron? That's see, that is a problem for me. It's a key component of established media, and that has me a little on edge about it.
I was where?
So Elrond tells Galadriel to put up your sword, which could be a quote alluding to the Bible, John 18 verse 11. Then Jesus said to Peter, put up your sword into the sheath, the cup which my Father has given me, shall I not drink it? Jesus was telling his disciple Peter to not bother fighting the Roman soldiers who had come to arrest him, that really Jesus' fate was sealed, and this is part of his Father's plan for him. Making this a kind of ironic thing for Elrond to tell Galadriel. Galadriel is trying to hunt down Sauron and eliminate this threat forever. But Elrond, perhaps knowing that evil is always going to exist in the world, and there's really not much they can do about it. Galadriel leads a group to explore an ice cave as the hand of a snow troll moves in the foreground.
That's
creepy.
cool.
On to the next clip.
It is over.
You have not seen what I have seen.
I have seen my share.
You have not seen
What I have seen.
what I have seen.
Here, this overhead shot of a city along a river, I'm guessing this is Númenorian, and then Elrond and Galadriel debate how much they have seen. Really, both of these characters have witnessed horrors from the conflicts in the First Age and suffered personal losses as their family members were killed, but I think Galadriel is referring to a future vision she has seen, a premonition of the fall of Númenor and the return of Sauron. Now, perhaps the most eye-catching shot of this trailer is this image of dead soldiers floating in the water as overhead a tower burns. Some are suggesting this could be the sinking of Númenor, but I don't know, this first season would just be really early for that. Others have wondered if this could be the War of Wrath, the final of the War of the Jewels fought over the Silmaril gems that were crafted by the elves from the two trees. This history, of course, explored in the Silmarillion. This is a war between the Valar and Morgoth, where the northwestern region of Middle-earth, Beleriand, was shattered and sunk into the ocean as well. This was the end of the First Age. But I actually think here we are seeing the first kinslaying at Aqualond, the Haven of Swans, in which Feanor, leading the Noldoran elves, attacked the Teleria elves to steal their ships. This could be why we're seeing elf corpses impaled by elf spears. Moving on.
Yes, but like I said, I think it might also be the Dagor Bragolath, which is the Battle of Sudden Flame, especially since we see later that Galadriel is covered in soot. And it was basically, this battle was basically where a whole bunch of dragons just came out of nowhere and just basically attacked everybody and burned everybody. So could also be that, but that is a very good point. I didn't think that those weapons were of elven make, but you know, hey, orcs could have gotten their hands on that too, possibly.
Darkness will march over the face of the earth. It will be the end, not just of our people, but all peoples.
So the vessel arrives in the harbor of Númenor, greeted by the statue of Arendil, father to Elrond and to Elros, who was the first king of Númenor. Now, others have pointed out how this statue design recalls the look of the Argonath in Peter Jackson's films. Whereas Arendil has an open palm to greet visitors, the Argonath held their palms out as if to turn people away, showing how humans over the ages went from open-minded in Númenor in the Second Age to close off in Gondor during the Third Age. Then we meet Gil-galad, Lord of Eriador and High King of the Elves of the West. Gil-galad led the combined forces of the elves and the dwarves and the men that we saw in the Fellowship prologue. And spoiler warning in case you consider text published for decades, spoilers for the show you're about to watch, Tolkien wrote how Gil-galad confronted Sauron and just Sauron's hand to his face caused him to burst into flame. But that, along with the human Elendil's sacrifice, gave Isildur the opening he needed to sever the finger from his hand. And I like how here Gil-galad seems properly concerned about the concerning threat as opposed to like completely naive and blind to it. Now there's some really interesting parallel shot composition in this section. We see elves in a swan ship as birds float around them, then Tarmiriel, the Queen Regent of Numenor, reacting to petals floating around her, and then the Harfoots as embers are floating around them. All of these floating objects could represent doom facing these characters. Really doom coming from the embers of the crashed meteorite. Now in Muriel's case, these petals could come from a white tree in Numenor as it senses the danger. Remember how Peter Jackson established the white tree in Minas Tirith, which actually stayed dead in the source material, but in the film it budded a flower when it sensed Aragorn's return. I just think that the focus on the two trees could imbue just a greater importance to the health of all of these trees as a symbol of Sauron's presence or absence. And we get our out of focus shot of our Meteor Man, played by Daniel Wayman, credited for now only as a stranger, but I think we can all assume probably a form of Sauron. More on that in a bit. Let's move on.
I don't think so.
I am sorry.
Mr. X.
The time has come.
The past is with us all. The past is dead.
So Elrond visits Khazad-dûm, and here we meet the Dwarf King during the third, as well as his son during the fourth, who smashes a boulder, the kind of move Gimli was going for when he tried to smash the ring in Rivendell. And then what looks like the Numenor throne room, we meet a new character named Halbrand. And the fact that we don't know much about this guy makes me wonder if he could grow up to be someone important. Perhaps one of the 9 kings who are entrusted with the ring, the future Witch King of Angmar, Lord of the Nazgul.
Maybe.
We see him fighting in a storm that could lead to a shipwreck, and it sounds like Galadriel will also go through a shipwreck in this series. There's a quick shot of Arondir, the Sylvan elf, who seems to get captured by orcs but breaks free and pulls off some insane acrobatics on the show. He's gonna be part of a forbidden love affair subplot. His chest plate seems to show the face of an ant. That's fun. We hear a voice saying, "The past is with us all." I believe that to be the voice of Isildur talking to his father, both of whom we see in the next section.
We either move forward or we die with it.
This could be the beginning of a new era.
Yes, so this bearded man is Elendil, father to Isildur, the leader who later joins Gil-galad in the fight against Sauron that we see in the Fellowship prologue. While we don't really see Gil-galad's fiery death in that scene, we do see Elendil get thrown and killed by Sauron, and Isildur running over to mourn him before Sauron stomps over to attack, and Isildur uses a broken blade to sever the finger. But also, Isildur is depicted here as just this Numenorian sailor, years away from that moral corruption the ring will curse him with. Now, yes, men are not supposed to live that long, but this show's producers have said that they're going to be doing some time compression on this series. Next, we see Ar-Pharazôn before a cheering crowd in Numenor. This is as he prepares to steal the throne from his cousin Miriel. I think we can expect Numenor to be the source of the Game of Thrones style political intrigue of the series. During the fourth, holds a piece of mithril. This is in its raw mineral form. Of course, the material that's later used to make the chainmail armor that Bilbo gives Frodo. And then there's this shot of elves in a circle drawing swords, perhaps part of the Oath of Fëanor, in which the sons of Fëanor vow to find the Silmarils after the 2 trees are destroyed. This would make this another First Age flashback. And then back to the stranger in the meteor crater. Pieces of debris float, and notice how the fire sucks inward toward him, suggesting that there's some sorcery behind this arrival, and the whole thing may be some trickery. Because notice how the overhead shot makes the fire in the shape of a ring, but also an eye. Both of which seem to be pretty solid clues pointing to this being Sauron. Because if we come back to the Christian symbolism here, the fact that this guy falls from the heavens does remind us a bit of Lucifer, the fallen angel. Sauron was known to be a shapeshifter, and I think this is part of his plot to pretend to be an emissary.
Still, man, he's not supposed to be the devil, the representation of the devil in Middle Earth. That belongs to the original Dark Lord Morgoth. He was actually depicted as Satan, because he is much more powerful and a much bigger threat than Sauron will ever be. All that stuff that you saw in The Lord of the Rings, all that stuff that you'll see here, Sauron's got nothing on Morgoth, on what on the threat that he posed.
From Aman, but sent from the heavens. However, since true emissaries from Aman are supposed to come from the sea, that could be why Galadriel and Gil-galad do not trust this guy. Overall, this series seems to show how all of these societies will be fooled into forging those 19 rings of power, blinded to the one ring forged in secret by Sauron. And it could be a lot of fun to watch that corruption in the form of this false prophet who used political machinations and religious fanaticism to turn these factions against each other. I just hope that the show can do it in a way that makes these civilizations still interesting pristine and
Same
smart
here.
and not
That's what I'm
overly
thinking.
blind or oblivious to the evil, but rather following the normal course of human nature, or I guess dwarf and elf nature, blind by their own ambitions or their paranoia or their tunnel vision. There's just lots of ways that you can make people blind to evil without making them stupid or obtuse. I have high hopes for this series though.
I've said this high risk, high reward, because honestly, if they depict things right in this show, especially that I see all this stuff from the first stage, that's why I have so much faith in the show, because I see a lot of stuff from the first stage, and honestly, I think the first age is my favorite age of Lord of the Rings. It's even better than the third age. And that's where the Peter Jackson films come from. But man, the first stage is so interesting, and some of the stories are amazing. The Fall of Gondolin, the Promise of Feanor, the Oath of Feanor. There we go. Morgoth himself, who was a better, as I said before, he was a better Dark Lord than Sauron ever will be. If Morgoth somehow came back, Sauron would have been like, hello, Master, how you doing? I got the world ready for you. Seriously. Some of the not Peter Jackson. J.R.R. Tolkien was a genius, a absolute genius, and so was his son, because his son wrote a lot of this stuff too afterwards too. And that's what I was saying. I finally figured it out. Bilbo is supposed to be J.R.R. Tolkien, and Christopher Tolkien is played basically Frodo. So think about it. They both see war. They both technically fight in it, and one clearly had a harder time than the other, because World War II was a lot worse than World War I ever was. So it like complete mind just blew my mind right there. Oh, anyway, please like and subscribe if you want to see more sexy or nerdy content, and I'll see you all in the next video, guys.